Throughout history, every generation has carried divine assignments, even in the darkest times. During slavery, many enslaved people were not only survivors, but chosen vessels. They were the spiritual carriers sent to hold faith, memory, and divine communication when the world tried to erase them. These chosen ones weren't always preachers or leaders in the public sense. Some were quiet visionaries who could feel heaven through the pain. They carried songs that opened portals of hope, spirituals that sounded like sorrow to the oppressor, but were actually codes of liberation to the enslaved. Songs like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Wade in the Water weren't just songs, they were spiritual blueprints that disguised instructions for freedom and messages for the soul. You need to take a listen to them. Some chosen ones were healers, midwives, root workers, herbalists who carried ancestral knowledge that saved lives. There were no doctors for the slaves, there were no nurses. Others had dreams that warned their communities of danger or intuition that guided escape routes before plans were spoken aloud. They were operating under divine intelligence long before the world had words for it. Even those who couldn't escape physically became spiritual architects of a legacy. Their prayers seeded movements they'd never lived to see. Their resistance in silence was still warfare in spirit. The chosen among them understood that freedom wasn't just physical, it was also spiritual. They were keeping the lineage alive. So, yes, they were chosen during slavery. They were the ones who heard the whisper of God in the fields, who refused to let captivity define eternity. Their purpose was to carry the code of endurance and faith through a time designed to erase it. Let's talk about what was really happening in the spirit during slavery. Because the story we were told only spoke of chains and cotton, but not of calling and covenant. They left out the part where God still walked among our ancestors, whispering purpose into the broken, sending visions into the weary, and turning what was meant to destroy them into divine initiation. Our ancestors weren't just enslaved people, they were chosen souls sent into a system built to erase them. Yet somehow they remembered who they were. Even when they didn't have names, they had knowing. Even when they couldn't read, they could feel the language of heaven moving through their bones. They sang their prayers because the system couldn't silence a song. They coded freedom in melody and hid messages in rhythm. Wade in the Water was more than music, it was a map. Steal Away Jesus wasn't just a hymn, it was a warning, a secret meeting, a divine alert. The chosen among them spoke in frequencies the oppressor could not decode. You see, during slavery, being chosen didn't come with robes or titles. It came with torment and insight. Those who could feel the unseen, the dreamers, the healers, the ones who could sense danger before it arrived. We're carrying ancestral technology that defied the system. Some could predict the overseer's mood. Some knew when a raid was coming. Some had visions of rivers, stars, or paths they never walked until the day they did. They were the intercessors between heaven and horror. They're the prayer warriors without Bibles, who turned suffering into sacred communication. The mothers who birthed prophets while humming freedom songs and whispers. The fathers who refused to let their spirit die, even when their body was chained. And make no mistake, the system knew who they were. That's why it punished those who prayed too long, sang too deeply, or taught too freely, because the chosen carried influence that could awaken others. They held a divine frequency, the kind that breaks programming. Some of those chosen didn't escape the plantations physically, but spiritually, they already had. They can walk through the fields and still hear God. They look at the sky and see signs They were the ones who understood that freedom had to be kept alive in the mind first. What they carried didn't die, it transformed. That spiritual intelligence runs through the bloodline of today's empaths, visionaries, and truth tellers. When you feel things deeply, when you can sense lies before words are spoken, when you cry for people you've never met, that's ancestral sensitivity. It's the chosen gift they passed down, not through textbooks, but through vibration. You've inherited the frequency of those who endured everything meant to silence them. That's why you feel more, see more, dream more. You are their answered prayer in motion. But let's go deeper. Because slavery wasn't just a physical system, it was a spiritual war. Every lash, every cell, every separation was designed to break connection, to stop chosen ones from remembering that they were connected to a source greater than any oppressor. But you can't enslave what's divine. You can only bury it until it rises again. And rise it did, through Harriet, who dreamed of routes before she ever walked them, through the old women who prayed under moonlight, through the healers who used roots and leaves when hospitals were closed to them, through the griots who kept the names alive so we wouldn't forget where we came from. They were all part of the same divine network, the spiritual resistance of the chosen. When you feel your ancestors moving through you, that's not imagination, that's inheritance. They're reminding you, we didn't survive for you to play small. You carry centuries of divine resilience coded in your DNA. The same intuition that told them when to run tells you when to move, when to trust, when to speak, and when to stay silent. This is why the empath today often feels misunderstood, because you're walking with a level of awareness the world still doesn't know how to honor. You've inherited the empathy of those who carried the suffering of a whole people and still believed in deliverance. You carry their discernment, the same spiritual radar that saw danger before it spoke. And you carry their responsibility to break the cycles that tried to break them. Our ancestors were not powerless, they were positioned. Even in bondage, their prayers moved dimensions. Their tears watered the soil of new nations. Their hope was the prophecy that we're now living out. So when you feel the weight of empathy, remember, it's not weakness, it's legacy. You're carrying ancient discernment. You're continuing their mission. And you're proof that the chosen line was never broken, it just changed form. The same spiritual warfare they fought through systems of slavery, we now fight through systems of manipulation, greed, and emotional control. The tools may have changed. The spirit behind it didn't. But the chosen still rise, because every time one of us wakes up to who we are, another chain breaks in the unseen realm. You are not just sensitive, you are connected. You're not just emotional, but encoded. And you're not just different, but destined. So when the world tells you to numb your gifts, remember who you came from. Remember the ancestors who carried truth through unspeakable pain and left a part of that truth inside you. They didn't survive so you could fit in. They survived so you could awaken. And when you awaken, you don't just heal yourself. You heal the bloodline. Every act of courage, every boundary, every moment you honor your intuition, it echoes back through generations, freeing those who came before and empowering those who came after. Our ancestors were chosen, and so are you. The same spirit that sustained them still flows through you. Never forget, you are the continuation of their prophecy. Their chains became your calling, their prayers became your purpose, and their survival became your signal to speak. You are the living proof that the chosen don't die in the fire, they become the flame. And there's a moment in every generation when heaven reaches down and says, now it's your turn to carry it. Our ancestors in chains passed something invisible through time, not just blood, but assignment. By the time the civil rights movement rose, the baton of divine resistance had already been anointed with the sweat, songs, and prayers of the enslaved. And those who caught it, they didn't just march, They moved with prophecy. The civil rights era wasn't only a political uprising, it was a spiritual reawakening. Behind every headline, there were people chosen to stand in the gap between the world and what heaven demanded it to become. They were the next runners in a relay that started long before 1955, long before a bus boycott or a dream speech. It started in the hushed harbors, in the coded songs of our ancestors, in the whispers that said, "Hold on, there's more coming." When the baton of divine resistance reached the hands of a new generation, it didn't look like a staff or a crown. It looked like courage under surveillance. It looked like a woman too tired from work to give up her seat. It looked like a preacher still believing in love while dodging death threats. It looked like students who faced fire hoses yet refused to curse the very people who hated them. These were the chosen ones of that hour, called not to comfort but to confrontation wrapped in grace. They carried inside them the same spiritual intelligence that guided Moses through the desert and Harriet through the woods. They felt when danger was near, yet they still walked toward it because purpose was louder than fear. Heaven was orchestrating it because systems only shift when the spiritually awakened step forward. Every movement needs intercessors in disguise, some in pulpits, some in kitchens, some in jail cells singing freedom songs like palms. Every chosen one during the civil rights movement was holding a piece of divine strategy. The organizers who built safe houses, the mothers who prayed all night, the artists who turned pain into protest, and the unknown believers whose names history forgot, but whose faith moved mountains. And yes, again, the system recognized them. That's why it tried to break them through fear, surveillance, and slander. But what the world called rebellion, heaven called realignment. Because these souls weren't fighting for visibility. They were fighting for vibration, for the frequency of justice to rise again, and a land built on silence. Think about it. When Dr. King stood at that podium, it wasn't just about a speech, it was ancestral sound. Every word carried the rhythm of chains breaking in the unseen. When Rosa Parks said no, it echoed every ancestor who'd been forced to say yes. When young marchers faced dogs and guns, they were completing the prayer of those who'd once been forced to crawl. That's divine resistance, the courage to embody heaven's will when earth isn't ready. It moves through generations like a secret language of the soul. The baton didn't stop in the 1960s. It passed again into the empaths, the creatives, the healers, and the truth tellers of today. Because spiritual resistance never ends, it just evolves. Today's chosen may not face fire hoses, but we face emotional warfare, misinformation, and systemic exhaustion. We fight to stay human in a world that profits from numbness. But the energy is the same. When you feel a call to stand for truth, even when it crosses you, that's the baton touching your palm. Every generation must decide what to do with it. Some run, some drop it, some hand it off too soon. But there are always a few. Those are the chosen, who hold it steady, knowing that their breath carries the momentum of centuries. Our ancestors in bondage started the run. The civil rights soldiers carried it through blood and barricades, and now it's in our hands to speak, to heal, to build, to forgive without forgetting, to create systems that honor spirit instead of exploit it. This is the lineage of divine resistance. It's not about perfection, it's about obedience. It's hearing that still voice saying, go where it hurts and shine there. So when you feel that ache to do right even when it's unpopular, understand. You're part of the same network that kept our people alive through centuries of attack. You're not just reacting to injustice. You're responding to a call that was written in your blood before you were born. The baton of divine resistance never dies. It only searches for hands brave enough to hold it. And if you're listening to this, maybe heaven is asking, will you run your part of the race? Because the movement isn't over. It just changed its outfit. The battlefield is now internal: mental health, emotional integrity, spiritual warfare disguised as normal life. But the chosen always recognize when the torch flickers. They step forward quietly with that same ancestral fire. Our ancestors ran so we could rise. The civil rights chosen stood so we could speak. Now we speak so future generations can see. And as long as there's one truth teller left, the chains remain broken, the flame remains lit, and the baton keeps moving. Thank you for visiting my channel. Stay covered, stay conscious, stay undefeated. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.